there, I'm Jen, this is Remembered Reads, and this is going to be my version of the mid-year freakout tag for 2023. Contrary to popular belief, the creators of the mid-year freakout tag are still around. Ellie from Earl Grey Books is still an active booktuber, check her out, and Chami from Read Like Wildfire deleted her book content, but her channel still exists because she switched to lifestyle vlogging. I don't know why everyone seems to think that they both disappeared, because they didn't. In any case, question number 1 is, what is the best book you've read so far this year? I don't know about best, but my favorite book that I read this year so far was From Nowhere to Nowhere by Bekim Sejranović. This was translated by Firth, and we follow a man who is not having an easy time given his place in history. He's a Bosnian living in Croatia who had moved there at the point when it was still Yugoslavia. The wars break out, and he's stuck because of ethnic and religious labels that really don't apply to him given the way his grandparents raised him, but because they're being forced on him, he ends up in situations where he just lies all the time. He becomes a refugee in Norway, and again, he's telling the truth in the sense that he's not lying to get jobs or to find a house or to become a refugee. That's all true. But when people are having friendships or romantic relationships with him, a lot of what he's telling them isn't true, because the truth doesn't feel right either, because a lot of this stuff is externally applied. And there's a very funny scene early on where he is at a funeral with his grandfather, and his grandparents raised him as kind of true believing communists, and so he was raised completely without religion, and he's at this funeral and he's looking around trying to keep up with people because he doesn't know when to bow, when to, everything. And it's just a metaphor for everything else that happens when he's working on a ship in Norway, when he's at this university in Croatia. All of this is, he's been set up to not be in the right place in the world, and it's just fantastic. Question number 2 is the best sequel that you've read so far this year. I did not read a huge number of sequels. The main ones were, as I read a couple of Agatha Christie's Poirot stories, so I'm going to go with the Christmas Pudding one, because that was the most fun, where Poirot is invited to a Christmas dinner, and needless to say, murder ensues. Question number 3 is new release that you haven't read yet but want to. And I picked up a copy of The Adventures of Amina El-Sarefi by Shannon Chakraborty, who I'm the only person on BookTube who didn't love The City of Brass, whatever the rest of that series was called. I didn't finish the first one. But I'm curious about fantasy with pirates, so I thought this might be fun, but I have not read it yet. So one of these days. Question number 4 is your most anticipated release for the second half of the year. I haven't been following new releases, so I don't know. So I just don't have an answer to that one. Question number 5 is biggest disappointment. My biggest disappointment was Jenny White and Ergun Gündüz's Turkish Kaleidoscopes, Fractured Lives at a Time of Violence, which is about 1970s students in Ankara. And this could have been really brilliant, and the art is fantastic. It's a graphic novel that is loosely based on experiences that the author had when she was a student in the 70s, but it's just not good. The story is too brief to start with, but a lot of it's just very oddly told. And in the notes, the author comments that the artist told her, he couldn't work with what she had and she needed to change things, but they clearly needed to have more conversations with that, because the storytelling is just not done well. Like, Jenny White is an academic, and this was her first collaboration with an artist for a graphic work, and they just needed to work together more, I think, because that had the potential to be really brilliant, but it just isn't. Question number 6 is biggest surprise, and my biggest surprise was As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow by Zulfa Kato. This is a young adult novel with a romance subplot, and I think the constraints that you normally have, both for the age group and for that kind of subplot, I think it manages to succeed at a higher level than it would need to for a lot of books that are sitting in that genre for that audience. This follows a girl/woman in her late teens who was a pharmacy student when the Civil War or Revolution broke out in Syria, and she's been kind of upgraded to nurse because the actual nurses have all been killed at the hospital that she's working at or volunteering at. And she and her love interest are trying to get their families to Germany. And it plays out, it hits the points that you expect with a romance subplot young adult novel, but I think it does it in a much more subtle and interesting way than a lot of books that are for that age group and in that subgenre often do. So that was surprising. Question number 7 is favorite new author. This was a debut author, and like I said, I enjoyed it, so I'd like to read more from her, but I'm not going to call that a favorite. I really loved, as I said, From Nowhere to Nowhere. I'd love to read more of Bekim Sejranović's stuff. Unfortunately, almost none of his books are translated into languages I speak. I have this one, Ton Fils Huckleberry Finn, which was translated into French, obviously, so I'm going to be reading that one, but these are the only two that I could possibly read because they're just not available. Yeah, so I don't know. Questions number 7 and 8 are newest fictional crush and newest favorite character. And I'm never good at the character questions because I don't really like characters. That's not true. I'm not really interested in characters most of the time. But I did enjoy a lot of the complicated character dynamics in The World and All It Holds by Alexander Heyman. It's describing a relationship that could be beautiful and could be creepy and could be unhealthy because it is a man who is, the person he was in love with has been dead for years, but he's still hallucinating him. And it's kind of fascinating. So the relationship to reality, not the relationship between the characters, but the relationship to reality in that, I think is fascinating because the guy is still managing to carry himself and his daughter through a lot of really hideous times in history, and that relationship to reality is really interesting. So that is my favorite character. And sure, why not call it a crush too? Because it's fascinating. I know that's a weird answer. Question number 10 is book that made you cry, and 11 is book that made you happy. And my answer to both of those are An Immense World by Ed Yong. The subheading on it is How Animal Senses Reveal the Hidden Realms Among Us, which is a work of pop science in which the author is exploring how different animals see, air quotes around see, because it's about different senses as well, touch and heat senses and ultraviolet senses and electric senses, like with eels and whatnot. And it both made me happy because it's fascinating, especially when they're talking about vision in bees versus vision in humans and how we can't really explain it to each other because you perceive the world so differently. And I think that's just brilliant. And then the end of this is about how as species go extinct, we lose their perspective on the world and how it's not just the tragedy of the individuals, but it's the tragedy of losing an entire way of thinking, being, feeling, etc. And that was kind of gutting. So yeah, happiest and saddest with that one. Question number 12 is your favorite book to film adaptation that you saw this year. I have seen 0 book to film adaptations this year. I was trying to think of what I could answer to this, and I went through a few things. So I saw Verdi's Macbeth, which is obviously an opera adaptation of Shakespeare's play Macbeth, but I don't know that that counts, because not only is it not a film, do plays count as books? I don't know, because I mean, I saw plays too, do I say? I saw adaptations of that? I think that's cheating, so no. And I mean, I saw the musical Hamilton, which is based on Ron Chernow's biography of Alexander Hamilton, so does that count? I feel like those are cheating. So I'm going to hold back up The World and All It Holds and comment that Damir Imamović, who's a Bosnian folk singer, did an entire album of songs that are inspired by this book. And I think that's really interesting. I mean, I know it's not a film, but it's fascinating stuff. So if you're reading this book, go listen to it. Maybe even simultaneously listen to it while you're reading. I think that would be neat. Sadly, it came out several months after the book did, so I didn't get to do that, but I think it might be fun to reread it while listening to that album. So, that. Number 13 is your favorite video that you've done this year. I've been pretty lazy on the videos this year, which I know some people have noticed I've been doing fewer than usual. But I had fun doing the Edge of Reading tag, which I kind of rambled on at, which maybe I should do more of, because then I'd do more videos, maybe. I don't know. But that was fun, so I'm going to say that one. Question 14 is the most beautiful book that you've bought this year. And that's what's hanging out over here. I had read Paco Roca's Twists of Fate last year. It's translated by Erica Mena. It is a beautiful graphic novel that is about Spanish Civil War refugees who fought for France in the Second World War under the assumption that once the Germans were out of France, they'd be ousting Franco from power in Spain, which obviously didn't happen. What happened to these men who had gone to France and Morocco and Algeria and been left disappointed by this? What were their lives like afterwards, and so on? And it's just a beautiful book. I read the ebook when I read it the first time, and I wanted to buy a copy, and it's just a really nice addition too. I would call that the most beautiful book that I bought this year. And question number 15 is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? And I believe that I have nothing else that I need to do for the end of the year. So I'm completely free to read whatever I like for the rest of the year, barring doing the final round of the BookTube prize or joining or... Oh, actually, now that I've said that, I realize I do have a few advanced copies from NetGalley that I need to get to. So I guess technically I have a couple of those. I was so excited that I had no more prescribed reading, but that's a lie. Anyway, I think that's the last question. As always, this is a BookTube tradition, so if you're watching this and you haven't done it yet, go do it. Even if it's a month late, you can still do it. Even if it's September, October, you can still do it. But remember, the creators are still around. Anyway, if you've read any of the books that I've talked about, I'd love to hear what you thought about them, especially if you have very different experiences of them, because that's always fun. Anyway, that's it for now. Ciao.